NBA players are professional. They're these superstar players that are made to look like they're a different species all on their own. But they're all humans too. And that's proven because just like all of us, they all have had their own pretty embarrassing moments, and whether they were on or off the court, they're all just as bad. Like when Brandon Knight was on the wrong end of two of the most embarrassing plays in NBA history. And they were both during the same season, and as a matter of fact, only a month apart. During the Rising Stars Challenge game, Kyrie Irving got him on an ISO, hit a crossover into the step back that sent Brandon Knight straight to the floor. But then less than a month later, he does the unthinkable and jumps to block a lob to prime Lob City DeAndre Jordan, and I think we all remember how that went. Now, you probably don't remember much from Jason Kidd's one season as Nets head coach, but I know we all remember the spilling incident. The Nets were down by 2 with 8.6 seconds left, but he had no timeouts, so a player hits him, spills his drink, stalls the game, and basically gives him a free one. Then afterwards, it was watched back and found out that he said "hit me" right before it happened, so he got fined $50,000. The whole thing was an embarrassment for him, and has infamously become one of the most memorable moments of him being a head coach. Taking things off the court, Tim Hardaway Sr., by most people's account, had a Hall of Fame career, but one of the main reasons he was never actually put into the Hall, maybe because some of the comments he made back in 2007, where he had some tough choice words to say about gay people. And it's really tough to look back on now, and kind of makes you cringe, especially seeing how far the world's come today. Tim says that he knows that's the reason he was never inducted, but I will admit he has done a ton since 2007 to try to make things right, and there's reason to believe he's actually changed as a person, which is good. What may be even more embarrassing, and I find it hard to think of anything worse than this, is players way overestimating their value and turning down huge contracts to get more money. I'll keep this kind of brief because I may make an entire video on this in the future, but we know what Dennis Schroeder did recently, so I mainly want to talk about Nerlens Noel here and the fact that he turned down a $70 million deal from the Mavericks to pursue a max contract somewhere else, then proceeded to get no other offers and sign with the Thunder on a 1-year, $4 million deal. And sure, he's suing Rich Paul and saying it was his fault, but it shouldn't have taken a rocket scientist for him to know his value and know that he wasn't a $125 million player. Like, anyone on the planet could have told you Nerlens Noel was and still is nothing near a max contract guy, so I don't feel bad for him. And same with James Harden. Now, back on the court, when things don't go your way, it's understandable to get mad, but Josh Hart had no idea why Harden had to get this mad. He tried to do one of those, I'm gonna do one hard dribble to get all my anger out on this ball, bounced it too hard, missed the catch, and smacked himself in the face. And that, combined with Hart's reaction, was what made this a perfect Shaq then a full moment. And he was caught on the wrong side of that one, but the tables were turned back in 2018 when he crossed over Wesley Johnson, made him fall back about 5 feet onto his butt, and just stood there and waited until somebody came to contest his shot. That's why if you get crossed, especially that bad, never just give up on the play and wait for them to take the shot before getting back up, because it'll make you look 10 times worse. So really, shout out to Teodosic on this one for being a true friend, because had he not stepped up, Harden would still be standing there waiting to this day. And I'm sure Wes Johnson wants to forget that moment, but none of us have forgotten the situation Greg Oden was in when he had a private photo leak online. And you know, this doesn't always have to be a terrible situation, but oh, it was. Because, you know, usually if this happens, you either acknowledge it or you don't. And if you do, it's probably a real brief statement and then you try to never talk about it again. But instead, this happened to Greg while his career was going nowhere with injuries, and he was on the sideline. And not only that, the Portland Trail Blazers made him have an entire press conference about the picture leaking, where he kept apologizing and said a lady that he had been with over a year ago had that picture of him and leaked it. I mean, what do you do in Portland? And sure, after that, his career never went great, but no matter how good you are, you're not safe from being embarrassed at any time, because it even happens to Steph Curry, like in 2019 when he had the widest open fast break in the history of fast breaks, and he goes to dunk it but slips on the Lakers floor and falls on his back. And here's when I'd say stick to threes, Curry, but he gathers himself and shoots a 3 right after and airballs it completely. So I got nothing to say to Steph except maybe don't pass up wide open shots, because way back in 2016, the Warriors are coming down on a fast break. Clay passes it to Steph in the corner, who doesn't have a defender anywhere near him, so he turns around, holds 3 fingers up, and then Curry passes it back to Clay right off his back. Some people blame Thompson for turning around too early, but there's no reason Curry shouldn't have got that shot off. And when your teammates got that much trust in you to hit the 3, you gotta hit the 3. And that's always the risk of turning around before the shot goes in. It's well worth it if it goes in, like we've seen Curry do a bunch of times, but it's only such a cool move because there's a chance that it doesn't go in and you end up looking like Nick Nick Young and Kemba Walker. Nick Young shoots the three, watches the ball not go in all the way, but turns around anyways, and puts his hands up, then realizes he missed, in what's turned into one of the more infamous moments in recent years. Then Kemba one-ups him, watches the ball bounce around the rim, then turns around and shimmies for a miss. And the camera angles on these of them celebrating, as you can see the ball not go in behind them, are just the best part. And you can't have an embarrassing video without mentioning the wheelchair game, where during the NBA Finals in 2008, the biggest stage in the history of basketball, Paul Pierce is guarding all-time great Kobe Bryant, gets scored on, then falls to the floor and craps his pants. There was a conspiracy about this for years, and then he finally confirmed it a couple years ago. It just makes it so much worse that he was actually carried off the court and then onto a wheelchair and taken to the back because he couldn't get up on his own. Then he comes back after 2 minutes of game time, and the crowd gives him a standing ovation. He gets a standing ovation for having taken a dump. Here's a random play from Carmelo Anthony back when he played for the Knicks. There's an out-of-bounds call, and Melo ends up with the ball again. He goes to finish strong and dunk the ball after the whistle to try to make a statement, but fails miserably. He's 6'7" and his legs must have just stopped working mid-jump because he doesn't get anywhere close to dunking. He only gets like halfway up the rim and still needed an entire another like foot to have even dunked the ball. But instead he hits the rim and just falls to the ground and slid to the free throw line in what would have been a meaningless dunk in an embarrassing situation that he could have easily avoided. Now anytime I think of Nate Robinson, I think of his height, his super athleticism, and I don't know if it's just me, but I also think of the time that he went to celebrate with Paul Pierce right after he just hit a game winner and just flipped over him instead while Paul completely ignored it and acted like it didn't happen. He pulled Paul down right as he went to jump over him, so when he came back down, it was right on top of his back, making it one of the times his 43-inch vertical actually cost him. Anthony Davis, on the other hand, may be the tallest man some people ever see in person, but even he still looks like a kid next to Boban Marjanovic. There might not have been a more embarrassing post-play altercation than after a foul gets called on Boban. He holds the ball up in the air and AD tries to swat it out of his hands 2 times before realizing he just looks like a baby getting bullied. We all remember Michael Jordan's Hall of Fame induction. It was when the greatest player of all time was inducted, but it was also one of the most awkward inductions ever, because in a lot of people's minds the GOAT embarrassed himself during the whole thing, since instead of thanking everyone throughout his career, most of his 23-minute speech was spent roasting everyone. He called out the Hall of Fame for raising ticket prices that he had to pay for, roasted his old high school coach for not putting him on the varsity squad, actually flew out the guy that beat him for that spot to roast him too, roasted his old North Carolina coach, and of course called out Bulls GM Jerry Krause. And those were just the highlights. He also made other comments about NBA players, his college roommate, and even his own family. I don't necessarily think it was as bad as everyone made it out to be, but I definitely see where they're coming from. I do think Dwight Howard's awkward interview was even way worse than people say it was though. And that was when Magic head coach Stan Van Gundy just got done doing a 3-minute rant in front of media, saying how he knew that Dwight told management that he wants him fired, and Howard comes up, puts his arm around Stan, and acts like they're best friends, until Stan immediately walks away. Dwight then tries to deny the rumors that he wants Stan fired, until reporters tell him that Stan just said it was true. So he just talks some nonsense for the next 5 minutes, and it's the cringiest, most awkward 5 minutes of NBA TV that I've ever seen. But speaking of awkward, there's never been a worse free throw handshake than the one between Kevin Love and Wesley Johnson. Wes goes for the shake, then Kevin, then back to Wes, then back to Kevin, then Wes walks away, so he follows him all the way to the side because he wasn't giving up without getting that handshake. And it was so bad that the Wolves and the NBA made an entire video talking about just how embarrassing it was. It's also not talked about much, but the fact that Derrick Rose cheated his way to Memphis wasn't a good look either. He had to pass the SAT exam to get into that college. And at the time he was a superstar in high school, but failed the SAT 3 times and the similar ACT once. He just couldn't pass it, and if he didn't, he wasn't going to be able to play college basketball. So he had someone take it for him and pass. And it wasn't until years later, when he was already in the league making millions of dollars, that anyone ever found out. And because of it, Memphis had to forfeit all of their 38 wins that they had during the year they made it to the finals when Derrick Rose was there. And Derrick really never paid the price for this one, but because he cheated, it all fell down on his former college.